Right, okay, so first I want to thank Harry Owens for the invitation to speak here tonight and congratulate him on a very diverse programme of talks over the week. I want to thank him as well for giving me the PhD. I was delighted when I saw that poster. Still a little bit of work in it, we will get there eventually. And it's an honour to share the bill with such a prestigious list of speakers, both national and internationally. Of events which are much more, shall we say, problematic than the Easter Rising. At least on that one there was some kind of broad agreement in the country. There's very little new about commemoration and commemorative ritual. The generation that we've spent most of this year commemorating were really masters of the practice. You know, a lot of them were very politicised by the 1898 centenary of the United Irishmen that brought many of them into radical politics, and annual excursions to Bodenstown had a formative influence on young Republican radicals. Pearse, Connolly and others like them often evoked men like Emmett and Fintan Lawler in pursuit of their own political objectives. By now, looking back on 2016, I think it's fair to say it's very clear to us that commemoration by its nature has little to do with the past and is largely shaped by contemporary political objectives and goals. The Irish state has at times exploited the past this year in truly remarkable ways. But if commemoration is problematic today, in the letters pages of the Irish Times in the 1930s, it was something different entirely. It was bad for your health. On the streets, commemorations could provide the setting for intense violent confrontation between the left and the right, who in some cases sought to claim the same political lineage. And international events, and in particular, but not exclusively, events in Spain, shaped a huge amount of this, and the heightened sense of anti-communism in Ireland that led to violent assault and commemorative gatherings. So what I want to do today in this brief talk is look at the manner in which the Republican Congress and others on the radical left utilised commemoration. Who were they commemorating? In particular, of course, James Connolly, but which isn't surprising at all. There's also a very strong emphasis in the 1930s on Liam Mellows. It's a beautiful woodcut image of Mellows from the front of the Republican Congress newspaper. And I want to look at the way in which the Republican Congress organised some of the most remarkable commemorations of the time, reinventing the 11th of November in Dublin, Armistice Day, as a day of anti-war commemoration for the First World War, and not the traditional and squalid kind of poppy snatching of the 1920s. A cynic might ask, why would you study radical movements in 1930s Ireland? Why did they warrant study at all? As Bauer Bell said in his article, Ireland and the Spanish Civil War, it's still kind of true. While the spectrum of Irish politics was wide enough to include both communists and fascists of a sort, the mass remained huddled in a narrow band near the centre. Yet despite lacking any significant electoral success, and despite not succeeding in building a movement which would challenge the Irish state, I think Richard English is right in saying that the radical left of the 1930s did produce some of Ireland's most talented intellectuals, highlighting people like Peadar O'Donnell and Frank Ryan, both central to the story of Ireland and the Spanish Civil War in their own unique ways. English has argued that while socialist republicanism and the radical left never sustained a position of dominance within the Irish nationalist tradition, its adherents have always wielded considerable influence over Irish republicanism and are certainly worthy of study. Before you talk about commemoration in the 30s, the context of the time is very, very important. That's a very striking poster. That's Connolly House's election poster from the 1932 general election. We want no reds here. Keep their colour off your flag. For those who kept the red flag flying in 1930s Irish society, life was incredibly difficult. In the 1932 election, the outgoing government utilised anti-communist and anti-socialist hysteria, often drawing on Spain. On the eve of the election, the Irish Free State Election News warned its readers that in the event of De Valera's party achieving power, the extremist minority, as in Spain, as in Mexico, as in Russia, will get the upper hand. The Connolly House newspaper went on to warn that it's your duty to help the government party eliminate once and for all the danger of a Spanish Republic in Ireland. A careless electorate gave Spain a weak government, then the rest came. The changing political climate in Spain was often used by those on the right to rip up hysteria in Ireland, but it wasn't restricted to Connolly House. Eamon de Valera argued publicly and convincingly in the early years of the decade that communism was a poor fit for the Irish nation. In a statement to the United Press in 1931, before Fianna Fáil came to power, de Valera attacked the notion that his party were in any way communistic. He said that the politicians of the Cosgrave Party are at the moment feverishly engaged in working up a scare. He said, I doubt there's any country in the world that presents such an unfruitful field for communism as our country. The individualistic tendencies of our people are against it. The system of land tenure, peasant proprietorship is against it. Our Catholic faith is against it. There was a huge amount of publications in the 30s. Ada Blockham's publication, The Truth About the Spanish War for God in Spain. Ada Blockham was a supporter of Fianna Fáil and de Valera, so this stuff didn't always come from Connolly House, it could come from across the political spectrum. For all the propagandist material and all the hysteria that was produced around the far left in Ireland. It was numerically tiny, it was lacking in influence in political life or broader Irish society. In 1930, when Jim Larkin's Irish Workers' League put 12 candidates forward in the Dublin municipal elections, only one of them got elected, and that was Jim Larkin himself. So the left was not a mass force in Irish public life, but to those whipping up hysteria, that didn't really matter. The Blue Flag, a newspaper that was affiliated to the Blue Shirts, they said that while it may be taken for granted that the organised Communist Party in Ireland is numerically weak, they're no weaker than the Communist Party in Russia was a year before they became the government of Russia, which isn't exactly true. We have a good insight into how many people were active in left-wing politics thanks to the fact that the Comintern archives are at our disposal now. In 1932, the Revolutionary Workers' Group, which was a forerunner of the Communist Party of Ireland, made it clear that there were 88 activists in Dublin, of whom 9 were IRA members. In the second half of the decade, the Communist Party were not seen by the state to represent any kind of viable threat. A detailed internal Department of Justice file in 1936 said that the CPI was, quote, neither unlawful nor yet completely above board, and described the party as having only a few dozen activists, having been devastated by the intense anti-communism of the time. Anti-communism in the 1930s wasn't only publications like For God in Spain or Denunciation in the Irish Independent. It could include physical assault. Connolly House on Great Strand Street, the headquarters of the Revolutionary Workers' Group, was sacked by a crowd in March 1933 who were whipped into a hysteria by the St. Patrick's Anti-Communist League, whose General Secretary PJ Duffy told the crowd that there were 600 communists in Dublin, all of whom were pledged to obey the Third International and all of whom received their orders from Moscow. If there were 600 communists in the city, it certainly would have been news to the communist movement. There was a sinister dimension, as I say, to the emergence of such anti-communist feeling at that moment in time. When this building was laid siege to, the crowd sang songs like Faith of Our Fathers and Hail Glorious St. Patrick. And R.M. Douglas, a historian who's examined the far right in Ireland in detail, he believes that what was witnessed on the streets of Dublin in March 33, the attack on Connolly House and other buildings like it, amounted to some of the worst political violence in the city since the Civil War in terms of mob behaviour. On footblock, the organ of the IRA, which was under left-wing editorship at the time of this attack, branded the attack on Connolly House to be the work of Hitlerists, with an editorial proclaiming Hitlerism is a disease which until now appeared to be confined to the European continent, but it now appears to be developing into a plague and likely to sweep all over the world. It has manifested itself in Dublin in the last few days. Like witch hunting of old, it is likely to become a sport unless it is rudely checked. So this context is very, very important. You can't talk about the left, the Republican Congress commemorating people before you talk about the intensely difficult political environment they found themselves in. And I think this only makes the emergence of the Republican Congress, a broad front of socialists, Republicans and anti-fascists, all the more remarkable and all the more impressive. Even for that brief moment of time, that a movement like it could emerge in such a hostile atmosphere was remarkable. What were radicals in the 1930s commemorating? I suppose within the broader nationalist movement, the radical left had played an important part in the revolutionary period of 1913 to 23. The radical left's approach was multi-pronged, of course. There was trade union agitation, the refusal to handle British military goods, there were general strikes, and there was, of course, participation in armed defiance of British rule, primarily through the Irish Citizen Army, a participant in the Easter Rising, and to a lesser but still important extent, a participant in the War of Independence and the Civil War. And in the decades which followed, I think the radical left was commemorating and celebrating its own unique contributions to that period of struggle, creating its own narrative of the period. James Plunkett, the writer, remembered that perhaps the most important legacy from the lockout was the place it was to obtain in Irish working class mythology. So the left found its own moment in the story of revolutionary Ireland, which it sought to commemorate. One reason I think they were particularly keen to commemorate Irish history was the accusation that the radical left was anti-Irish or anti-nationalist in a broader sense that was very commonly levelled against various political organisations in the 1930s. By claiming that the only allegiance the Irish left had was to Moscow, anti-communist forces attempted to appeal to the sense of nationalism in the Irish people, arguing that it was an Irish duty to stop the spread of communist or socialist ideals which were hostile to Irish nationalism. The radical left counterbalanced these claims by attempting to place themselves in a kind of long line of progressive Republicans. And really from the time the Republican Congress was founded, there was a very strong emphasis on historical commemoration and historical education. Theobald Wolfe Tone was a figure of paramount importance. In June 1934, the Congress newspaper said that Tone, the father of the real revolutionary doctrine in Ireland, taught that irrespective of creed and prejudice arising from creeds,
the men and women of no property should be massed together to struggle for the freedom of their country and for freedom from exploitation. The teaching of Tone is adopted by the Congress Organising Bureau. The Republican Congress took part from the beginning in the annual pilgrimage to Wolfe Tone's grave. In 1934, it ended in spectacular scenes. Bodenstown was organised by the Irish Republican Army, and they utilised, well, Congress utilised the day in 1934 in two ways. Before they went to Bodenstown, they made their way to the grave of James Connolly at Arbour Hill in Dublin. This image was taken in Arbour Hill. It's often believed to be taken in Bodenstown, but according to the Congress newspaper, this is earlier in the day, before they made it to Bodenstown, at the grave of James Connolly. This event occurred in total secrecy, with no public advertisement, perhaps owing to the fact that there was a very significant presence of Protestant workers from the Shankill Road among those in attendance at the Dublin 7 cemetery. Congress placed great emphasis on attempting to organise among Northern Protestants, aligning themselves with the Northern Irish Socialist Party, which was a mostly Protestant force, and this gave the Congress contacts in traditionally loyalist working class areas like the Shankill. The Congress newspaper reported that on noon on Sunday, a busload of workers drew up at the gates of Arbour Hill. They were a body of Protestant men from the Shankill Road coming to lay a wreath at the grave of James Connolly. Dublin workers, mainly drawn from the units of Dublin Brigade, which joined the Congress committee, escorted the Northmen to the cemetery, George Gilmore in charge. The oration at Connolly's grave was delivered by Robert McVicar, who was a Northern Protestant, and he asked in his speech, "Is Ireland free and happy with all its slums? Slums wherein Irish children attempt to live and play. Has freedom been achieved for Irish workers who struggle today against overwhelming odds in their fight against poverty and disease?" This is one of the most iconic images to emerge from this period in Republican history. It shows a banner bearing the name of the Shankill Road, the historically loyalist working class area of East Belfast, alongside the words "break the connection with capitalism," a play on Theobald Wolfe Tone's declaration that his ultimate political aspiration was to break the connection with England. Patrick Byrne, in his memoirs of being in the Republican Congress, he provided significant information on the men carrying this banner, and there's an interesting Spanish Civil War dimension to it. He said that in June 1934, for the first time, a contingent of workers numbering about 500 travelled from the Shankill and other Protestant areas of Belfast in a fleet of coaches to take part in the annual Wolfe Tone Commemoration. One of the men who carried the banner, Jim Straney, died crossing the Ebro, the last major offensive of the Republican forces in Spain in 1939. At Bodenstown, this banner was taken from the Republican Congress. There's been great debate over just why that happened. Sean Cronin, in his biography of Frank Ryan, claims that the Tipperary IRA men who removed the banner, quote, saw it as a communistic banner. Bodenstown had never witnessed a more ironic scene, Catholics attacking Protestants trying to honour Wolfe Tone. I think Brian Hanley, though, has made a very convincing case that the bone of contention here was actually the unauthorised nature of the banner, noting that there was a large Communist Party contingent at Bodenstown that day who weren't involved in the fracas, and that Congress persistently claimed that the IRA members ordered to seize the banners showed no enthusiasm for the task. The following year, a radical left contingent was once again present, carrying its own banners and proceedings, indicating that IRA feeling had not dawned on the issue of unauthorised banners. When they were stopped the following year, the Irish Workers' Voice said that, quote, "This is a sign of the sort of freedom the middle-class leaders of the IRA want," an inflammatory statement which wouldn't have helped construct any meaningful bonds between Irish communism and republicanism. The newspaper complained that before the parade, all working class organisations were offensively ordered not to bring banners. The Communist Party of Ireland, that there might be no mistake about whom it was aimed at, was twice given this order, and literature was forbidden to be sold, lest the workers present hear the revolutionary working class message of communism. One priest who utilised the 1798 rebellion and the popular history of uprisings and speeches during the 1930s was Father Michael O'Flanagan, a Roscommon priest who was firmly aligned with the Republican movement both in Ireland and Spain, and who had been vice president of Sinn Féin during the revolutionary period. An opponent of the Anglo-Irish Treaty, O'Flanagan was still a vocal Republican voice in the 1930s, and he saw the commemorative speeches to draw a comparison between 1798 and what was happening in other places. He said, "The fight in Spain today is like the fight in Ireland in 98. The men who are fighting for the liberty of Spain today are like the men who fought for the liberty of Ireland then. General Franco, the butcher of Spain, is like Lord Castlereagh, the butcher of Ireland in 1798. It was, to an extent, dangerous for left-wing Republicans and Socialists to attend or organise commemorations in the Irish capital, owing to the risk of attack from anti-communist elements. The IRA Easter commemoration in 1936 demonstrated this risk very clearly. On the 20th anniversary of the Easter Rising, a communist contingent in the annual parade suffered repeated physical assault. They were joined by Willie Gallagher, a Scottish communist who'd been elected to the Westminster Parliament in the general election a year previous to that. A founding member of the Communist Party of Great Britain, Gallagher was one of the most publicly recognisable figures of the radical political movements in these islands and was a renowned orator, organiser and activist. The Irish press on the 13th of April detailed the assaults on communists, noting that, quote, members of the Communist Party were attacked with stones, and there were a number of free fights in which several people were injured during the IRA procession from Stephen's Green to Glasnevin Cemetery yesterday. According to the reports, there were 60 members of the Communist Party marching in the IRA parade with red tabs attached to their Easter lilies. At the GPO, it was said that a mob numbering around 200 people laid siege to the group, and that Roddy Connolly, son of the executed James Connolly, one of the figures behind the Republican Congress, was struck by a stone thrown by the mob. The Irish press went on to say that the attacks on the group continued all the way to Glasnevin Cemetery, where sellers of the British Communist paper, The Daily Worker, were assaulted and had their newspapers seized from them. One person was said to have shouted, "Don't let those communist bastards into this Catholic cemetery." Glasnevin is, of course, a non-denominational cemetery. Among those who was attacked that day was Jack White, a Northern Protestant, a veteran of the British Army, a man who had been influential in the establishment of the Irish Citizen Army, that by the second half of the 1930s was beginning to identify as an anarchist, something that brought him to Barcelona, where the ideology was particularly strong. From Barcelona in 1937, he remembered the violence in Glasnevin. He said, "Last Easter Sunday I had myself to fight for 3 kilometres against the Catholic actionists who attacked us on the streets as we were marching to honour the memory of the Republican dead who fell at Easter week 1916. The pious hooligans came inside the cemetery and tore up grave rails to attack us." The day after the IRA parade, there was what was described as a Republican Labour meeting at College Green to honour the 1916 veterans. Padre O'Donnell was to speak alongside Willie Gallagher. Garda intelligence estimated that, quote, about 98% of the people present were opposed to the meeting. Do the maths on that. From the perspective of the radical left, Easter 1936 was nothing short of a disaster. You know, the much anticipated visit of a radical like Willie Gallagher should have provided a boost to a struggling Irish movement. Instead, it was front page news for all of the wrong reasons. The Irish Times said that a shouting and violent crowd in 15 minutes put an end to the Labour meeting, which would have been held on Monday night in Foster Place. The Republican Congress responded to the violence of that year by organising an anti-fascist demonstration outside the offices of the Irish Independent, carrying placards proclaiming independent newspapers called for Connolly's blood in 1916, and blaming the Independent for whipping crowds into a frenzy. Commemoration of James Connolly, of course, was widespread in the period, and Commemoration of Connolly produced a really iconic piece of iconography still widely used today, which was the front page of the Republican Congress on the 11th of May 1935, the work, of course, of the great artist Harry Kernoff. The paper said that this striking woodcut, which is the work of the well-known artist Harry Kernoff, will lift Connolly and the Citizen Army out of the limbo to which the middle class would have them relegated. Kernoff was a very committed left-wing activist himself. He'd been in Leningrad in 1930. He was a member of the Friends of Soviet Russia. Among Kernoff's work in the collection of the National Gallery of Ireland today is a tribute to Vladimir Lenin, indicating Kernoff's respect and admiration for the Soviet Union. He also designed the masthead for the Irish Workers' Voice newspaper of the Communist movement. A few weeks after the James Connolly image appeared on the front of the Republican Congress, this image, another Kernoff original, appeared. This is an image, of course, of Roger Casement. So one thing that's interesting about Commemoration in the 1930s is often the very striking kind of iconography, the images that emerged in the papers, like the Congress. Perhaps the most commemorated figure for Congress specifically was Liam Mellows. Massive emphasis on Liam Mellows, who was, of course, executed during the Civil War in 1922. It looks very like a Kernoff work, though it's not. This image also appeared on the front of the Republican Congress newspaper. Padre O'Donnell was very much central to the historical memory of Liam Mellows in the 30s, creating him, I suppose, as a martyr in the tradition of Wolfe Tone. In his introduction to his prison diaries, O'Donnell said that Mellows was the greatest apostle of the creed of Tone in our day. He had the honour to be its martyr. His martyrdom enriches that creed and casts a glow over the names of all those who went the same proud way as he in its service. I think Donal O'Driscoll is right in saying that in his biography of Padre O'Donnell that O'Donnell was somewhat prone to exaggerating the significance of Mellows' thought, though he's by no means alone in doing that. In his detailed study of 20th century Irish communism, Emmett O'Connor has noted that the government of 1922 also, while they very much derided Mellows' 11th-hour conversion to communism, they did use it to present him as being a communist leader. The Communist Party themselves argued that Mellows, quote, had not yet grasped the full significance of its doctrine of working-class political action. But every year in December, around the anniversary of Mellows' execution, the Congress would organise a commemoration on the streets of Dublin. In 1934, the Congress newspaper marked the anniversary by saying that in 22, Mellows saw quite clearly the need for associating the fight for freedom with the fight for land and bread. He saw quite clearly that the Irish Republic can only be achieved through a leadership of the Irish working class. What Jenny Hope realised in 1803, what Lawler taught in 1848, what Connolly preached in the years leading up to 1916, Mellows in turn realised in 1922. He saw that constitutions and declarations of independence were but paper, and that the social conditions alone make and mould the lives of men. There are very detailed Garda intelligence reports on everything the left was doing in the 1930s, but there's detailed Garda intelligence reports on the annual Liam Mellows commemorations. They give good insight into the kind of rhetoric and ideology that was apparent in relation to kind of cultivating the memory of Mellows. The crowds were never particularly large, to be honest. The Mellows commemoration in 1934 drew a crowd of about 300 people. The following year, slightly less than that. I think one reason Mellows was used so prominently by the Republican Congress was the manner in which he was executed by the Free State. He was a way of linking the contemporary political agenda to the past, and often Owen O'Duffy was pulled into it. Linking O'Duffy to Mellows' execution and making a connection between 1922 and the ongoing civil war in Spain was a tactic frequently applied by the left. In the pages of The Worker, a poem commented on the fact that O'Duffy calls his godly band and leads them to the fray. They murdered Liam Mellows upon Our Lady's Day. God help you, Spanish Connollys, if Lombard Murphy's crew should blood their drunken hellhounds and send them after you. Such derision of O'Duffy and other blue shirt figures demonstrated, I think, that the radical left sought not only to shape the historical narrative and memory that existed around those they considered themselves to be following, but also their opponents. You know, time and time again, they were drawing the correlation between the blue shirts and the Free Staters in 1922. Leaflets attacking the blue shirts referred to them as the murder gang of 1922. And the blue shirts were also called the men who obeyed British orders and attacked the Republic in 22, the men who murdered the 77, and the men who now attack Spain. Perhaps the most unique commemorations that Congress were involved in were the annual Remembrance Sunday alternative commemorations that they were from 1934 were central to. Armistice Day, or Poppy Day in Dublin in the 1920s, had often been a very violent affair. Frank Ryan and George Gilmore, two prominent figures in the Republican Congress, had kind of proactively attacked Armistice Day events in the city in the 1920s as members of the IRA. In 1926, it was reported in the papers, and this is from 1926, that between 300 and 400 Republicans were instrumental in disturbing the commemorative events. One newspaper report said that divided into gangs, they moved around the city, snatching poppies from peaceable citizens and molesting ex-servicemen. One gang, larger than the others, attacked two policemen in Dawson Street, broke into the representative body on Stephen's Green and tore the Union Jack down from the window. On that occasion, a young George Gilmore was involved in a fracas on Grafton Street, which ultimately led to his arrest and his trial for stabbing a man in the shoulder, as well as stealing a Union flag and a British fascist badge from another man. Republican propaganda in the 20s attempted to present those who honoured the Irish dead of World War I as imperialistic. Frank Ryan speculated that the people who participated in British Legion commemorations, he said, were, quote, drawn primarily from bank clerks and the students of Trinity College. That was a pretty astonishing statement that ignored the fact that, as Brian Hanley has rightly noted, the section of working class Dublin did continue to identify with its contribution during the First World War in the years that followed independence. Ryan's opposition to Armistice Sunday and the IRA's physical confrontation of those who marked the day, I think, fundamentally lacked any class analysis of Irish participation in the First World War. Opposition to Armistice Day came not only from the IRA in the 20s and 30s, the National Association of the old IRA, even Fianna Fáil condemned what they called treasonable outbursts on the part of a small imperialist group, taking exception to Armistice Day, British Legion functions, imperial cinema displays, and even the Dublin Horse Show. The state was very keen to make Armistice Day a less contested event. The Department of Justice in October 1936 emphasised the belief that, quote, the wearing of British fascist uniforms should not be allowed and that no Union Jacks should be flown in the city centre. The idea of commemorating Armistice Day from a radical left-wing perspective emerged from the Congress, who believed that the event could take on an anti-imperialist dimension if injured and maimed veterans of the conflict were to the fore. Peter Berry, in his very detailed report in the Republican Congress, wrote about the manner in which this was intended to be a rival ceremony to the British Legion parade, and he talked about the spectacle of Ryan and O'Donnell marching with ex-servicemen to protest against imperialism. Republican Congress literature from Armistice Day in 1934 did focus on the perceived imperialist dimension of the day, but encouraged the public to, quote, make November 11th a day of loyalty to your own class and the Irish nation. The organisation stressed that, quote, hardship, unemployment and poverty are the lot of thousands of ex-British servicemen in Dublin, and Congress drew on the historical memory of Connolly by reminding the public of his mantra that the citizen army served neither king nor Kaiser, but Ireland. They promised a monster parade in the city against war in 1934. There was an appeal to Irish ex-servicemen, signed by 20 ex-servicemen, issued in the run-up to the 11th of November, which noted that Armistice Day parades under the British Legion for the last 10 years have been an insult to the dead and a mockery to the living. The 1934 Armistice Day has become a very central part, I think, of the historical memory and folklore of the Republican Congress. I think the numbers have been somewhat exaggerated. I don't think there were hundreds of ex-servicemen involved, as the Congress newspaper claimed. One historical account actually went as far as to say there were 2,000 veterans marching in protest against war and poverty, wearing medals, carrying tricolours and waving banners. I don't think the numbers were that high. Some newspapers claimed that less than 100 men actually took part, but it was still an enormously significant act. Frank Ryan later said, "Did you ever believe you would see me on an Armistice Day in Dublin, marching beside an ex-British soldier who wore his great war medals? For 10 years or so, I've shoved my way into the front of the anti-imperial demonstrations. I've taken and given blows and clashes with ex-servicemen and police. I claim the record for capturing Union Jacks. Armistice Day was our day for demonstrating against imperialism, and imperialism to us was typified by Union Jacks and ex-medal soldiers. But last Sunday, I walked beside bemedalled ex-soldiers." Commemoration remained important to those on the radical left who travelled to Spain to participate in the war. Peter O'Connor, a Waterford volunteer in the ranks of the International Brigades who fought at the hellish Battle of Jarama in February 1937, he remembered that on Easter Monday, 29th of March, the 21st anniversary of the Rising, we had a unique commemoration concert in the front lines, at which Irish, Americans, English, French, Belgians, Bulgarians, Greeks, Czechs, Slovaks, Spaniards, Slavs and Soviets all took part, and I had the honour of reading the proclamation. Many of those who are to the fore in radical commemorations in this period have actually become the subject of much commemoration themselves. Today there are plaques and memorials right across the island of Ireland commemorating those who participated in the Civil War in Spain. And I think Susie Linfield is right in saying that the Spanish Civil War may be one of the very few examples where history has been written arguably by the losers. For the radical left in 1930s Dublin, commemorative practices allowed organisations and individuals outside of the mainstream political discourse to seek validity in the past and to position their contemporary politics in a long Irish tradition of radicalism. While commemoration is often synonymous with triumphalist celebration, the radical left instead mourned its dead and emphasised that the vision of the individuals they remembered remained unachieved. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Donal. That was excellent. I think, and given the sort of audience we have here and the range of sort of perspectives people have, that it would help if maybe we got some initial reactions to what you presented, if there are issues of controversy or disagreement, maybe we could bring them out, our perspectives on this particular period and its link to the Spanish Civil War and the Spanish Republic. So I'm just going to open it up and ask, first of all, if there's anything that people want clarified in what's been presented, or if there's anything there that requires a bit more explanation or detail, please ask. And after that, we just open it up and see what views there are or perspectives there are. So does anybody want to respond initially? Go on. And just say who you are and then...
Frank Mellows is my name. Donal, Peter Berry's, who wrote a report on Congress, he's the same Peter Berry, is he?
Yeah, he's there decades later, still doing it.
Jesus, okay.
Yeah, he had an amazing career, Peter Berry, during the arms crisis and the like, but he wrote two very good detailed reports, one on the Communist Party, one on the Republican Congress. And the level of intelligence that the state had on the left in the 30s is just phenomenal, really.
And they're in the National Archives, aren't they?
They're in the Department of Justice as well.
And there's also information in the McQuaid archives about the 50s, because I've worked on that, and again Peter Berry turns up in some of the special branch reports, etc. So there's a lot of...
Like from the smallest meetings to mass gatherings, there was always someone there.
Central committee meetings.
Yeah. At the very top of these organisations were infiltrators.
Sent to special branch meetings when you're meeting 5 people.
Anyway, any other sort of questions or clarifications, and then we'll get views.
Where did you get the photograph of the two policemen standing in the ruins of Connolly House?
The answer is I got it on eBay for £2. There was a British newspaper archive, I think it must have been a British newspaper archive. They just put up hundreds of old pictures. And I was searching for Connolly, I think I was looking for a book, and I stumbled on it. So I scanned it up, it's online actually, I scanned it up if anyone wants it. It's a great image. If you look at they said that the communists were un-Irish. If you look at the petrol that they used to burn the building, it's British petroleum. But of course, like Bob Doyle was one of the people there that day, attacking Connolly House.
And Eugene Downing on the inside.
Yeah, Bob told a great story that he saw a newspaper saying that hooligans attacked Connolly House. He said, I'm not a hooligan. And as he investigated more and more about the people he'd been attacking, he ultimately became one. But his account, Bob Doyle's account of being there that day is very interesting, well worth reading.
Yeah, and I think, Donal, in some of the other stuff you've written around that time, it's also identifies that the middle classes were in the lead rather than hooligan elements, as they call them.
Yeah, the Gardaí said that it was in the crowd were a number of respectable, well-dressed women. The left has the idea that this was all these mysterious animal gangs that came out of the slums, smashed people and went back in. But it seems that the likes of the St. Patrick's Anti-Communist League and the Irish Christian Front, sometimes came from the middle of society and upwards.
They're the ones that could afford PP.
Sorry, David, I just wanted to come across any references to the Left Book Club in Dublin. The Left Book Club.
Good question, yeah. I think that's something for someone to do, is the cultural dimensions of what the left was doing in 1930s.
I was going through some of my father's papers, and he was clearly in the Left Book Club, right? So then I found a reference to it in the Department of Justice about 1939. But then when I went online about the Left Book Club, I discovered there were 1,400 branches of the Left Book Club in Britain. And internationally, there was clearly one in Dublin, albeit for a very short time, that distributed anti-fascist literature. But it would have been towards the end of the Spanish Civil War, about 1929.
Yeah, we've always had the perception that the 30s were such an entirely negative time culturally, and censorship and church power. But when you look at it on the left, there was a lot of interesting people doing interesting things. Padre O'Donnell, of course, and people like Leslie Deacon, and there was a lot going on culturally on the left in terms of theatre, in terms of the book club. There's work there to be done on that.
No, you mentioned Donal Fallon in there. Do we know, was he censured by the church for his attitudes, given that for the stance he was taking? Do we know anything about that?
I haven't looked at that in a while. I'm quite sure he was, though. Yeah, on more than one occasion. He's a remarkable figure. Like, he's touring America. He tours America.
Somewhere, sent away somewhere to show him up places.
He went to the United States during the Spanish Civil War and talks to Irish America.
Yeah.
At that stage, I think he's already suspended from the church.
I haven't looked at it in a while. There's a book called "They Fooled You Again," a biography of Flanagan. He's an incredible character, and he stands out. Like, you have visiting priests in Dublin, you have Catholic priests from affected areas, but for him, for someone that's been there since the beginning, since O'Donovan Ross's funeral and that before, it's incredible.
Just a question, Donal. The actual formation of the Congress, is its ultimate failure the result of is it really the end of the kind of left-wing ideology within the IRA at the time? If you look at the likes of Ryan and O'Donnell and Gilmore would have been kind of main people theorising these sort of things, and they'd obviously had the Sarah experience just prior to that point, and they've kind of taken all the main left-wing elements within the IRA to the Congress, and then you get obviously the move towards kind of Miltonism with kind of under Russell or whatever, and it's really, I suppose, probably up until the 60s that they really take a shift left again, you know?
Yeah, why did it fail? Or?
Yeah, is that the end of left-wingism within the Orthodox IRA?
Good question. Yeah, my impression of Congress before I started any research was that they met in minds, they split, and that was the end of it. They actually did quite a lot of remarkable things. Despite the fact they were hampered greatly by the split, there's always an emphasis on Spain. They led very, very active tenants' leagues in Dublin. That's something that needs to be written up. Like the Congress organising in the slums and really going after Alfie Byrne, the mayor of Dublin, who's become this great romanticised figure who did very little for anyone poor. bar handout sweets.
I think
Congress went to the war.
Very interesting character that deserves much more work than has been done is Neil Gould, because Neil Gould was an extremely important person. But talk about victory or history being written by the losers. The reason he has dropped off the scene is because very late in the day he fell out with the Communist Party, and it didn't suit the Communist Party, therefore to remember the role that he played. And in terms of the question the man just said there were plenty of Republicans, left in the IRA when the Congress split. And in actual fact, very shortly after the Curragh Camp opened, when they put Gould into the Curragh Camp for a short time, there was a split within the IRA, which was essentially a left-right split. And as far as I can tell, it was basically the left was the Dublin IRA. And now that's very crude, and I haven't really looked into it, but that's an impression.
Our claim. Anybody else? And otherwise we'll ask maybe that Sean would make a presentation now. We did the same thing.